Let's get a little bit more into the Trump JFK assassination symbolic thread that is seemingly being woven together through everything that has been presented to us as a newsworthy event. Up on the screen here, I have the fact that George Foreman, former professional boxer, died on March 21st, 2025, which was yesterday as I'm recording this. And it just so happens that George Foreman's last fight as a professional boxer was November 22nd, 1997, at the Trump Taj Mahal. Once again, there is an association between Trump and the day that President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in 1963, November 22nd. And this particular November 22nd was in 1997, which, remember from the last video, was the same year when The Devil's Advocate was released, where they used Trump's penthouse as Satan's home on earth, as well as the release of Contact, where you now have Donald Trump doing all of these Oval Office rituals with the Contact device in the form of the Club World Cup trophy on display for everyone to subconsciously assimilate as each ritual is taking place. Remember, this trophy is for a tournament that will take place in America this coming summer that starts on June 14th, or Donald Trump's birthday, which again ties it right back to his original first birthday during a total lunar eclipse blood moon in 1946. I'm not going to try and make some kind of definitive statement about how and why George Foreman died as a part of this symbolic ritual that involves the total lunar eclipse of America. The moon child eclipsing what America was and turning it into something else as the eclipse leaves the sun, metaphorically speaking. This is the Great American Eclipse. There's no way for us to know how these deaths are occurring to get them into the news cycle in the perfect way that they are seemingly placed into it. So it's kind of like speculating on how they brought those two towers down. You could spend a lifetime going through all of the alleged evidence that points one way or another, and ultimately you're going to come to the conclusion of, well, I can't really prove any particular theory. I can narrow it down in a percentage range basis and say, well, I think this was 10% likely to have happened, but this over here, that was probably 30%. You could do a service to everyone going through the information like that and making things more or less likely. But ultimately, due to the nature of this thing and how it is presented to us, there is no way to prove it. So I tend to avoid those kinds of inquiries and focus on the things that can be proven. Right? This is a clear example. Nothing can be disputed about the fact that this last fight of George Foreman took place on the same date that JFK was assassinated in the Trump Taj Mahal. And now, during Trump's second presidency, which is the second tower being struck by that second plane on September 11, 2001, metaphorically speaking, you have this death of George Foreman right in the context of a mini ritual involving this total lunar eclipse that took place on March 14th, as that relates to the larger eclipse ritual surrounding Donald Trump, the Moonchild. That's a fact that just can't be disputed, right? And so those are the kinds of things that I would advise focusing on, because then anybody who is attempting to distort this kind of thing has to move in a direction that is not focused on facts. And in that way, they discredit themselves because it's clear they're reaching in their attempt to distort what is being presented. This is to say that If I came to you and said, hey, I know exactly what happened here with George Foreman, I know what they did to him, this death isn't as it's being presented. Well, now I just provided the opening, right? How can you say that? Where's your proof? Where's your evidence of this? Oh, you're just a conspiracy theorist that makes things up to fit your narrative. There's no proof of anything you're saying here. Hopefully you see what I mean there. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. I was not aware of this until today, that Kendrick Lamar's album GNX was also released on November 22nd, 2024, the same day that JFK was assassinated. And in a prior video, I went into how Wicked was released that day as well. This remake of The Wizard of Oz. Okay, so you have Oz as it relates to Oswald, the assassin, allegedly, of JFK. The Wizard of Oz reboot is released on November 22nd, the same day that Kendrick Lamar's GNX was released. And this should take on obvious meaning in the sense that, first, Kendrick Lamar is a Gemini. He was chosen very specifically for the Super Bowl halftime ritual because Donald Trump is a Gemini. Donald Trump is the twin of 9/11, the Gemini Man. That old Will Smith movie where he's Gemini Man. It involves a clone of his, a twin that he is dueling with. This idea of the twin that is a Gemini, and that is very clearly the idea, symbolically speaking, that Donald Trump is the twin of the September 11th, 2001 event in New York City, where those two towers were destroyed so that something new could be built from its ashes. This is what Donald Trump is doing to America, right? His two terms are those two towers that are being destroyed in a controlled demolition so that something new can be created out of those ashes as it relates to the United States of America itself and its place in the world system that is coming into shape. Kendrick Lamar is chosen for the Super Bowl ritual for that reason, so that the first lyrics that he speaks into the microphone are directly referencing the Gemini Man being back. Now, going in the direction of the quote-unquote debunkers, they would say, well, yeah, his lyrics are because he was born a Gemini, Kendrick Lamar. This doesn't have anything to do with Donald Trump. But it just so happens that Donald Trump was in the building as he is speaking those words. He's referencing himself and Donald Trump. Only if you understand the subconscious programming will you understand that the true reference is to Donald Trump, the Gemini Man, being back, and the energetic ritual that Kendrick Lamar is referring to in those lyrics. Right after Uncle Sam is on the screen with 88 on his vest, also directly referencing Donald Trump and his association to 88, which we can now add to the list, the 88,000 pages of the JFK files that were released just this week. And this dipper is the same pattern that's on the Crew 9 patch that involved the birth ritual of the SpaceX capsule, the Dragon, falling into the water. It's symbolically born into the Gulf of America. This is the Great American Eclipse, 88 miles per hour. 10:04 p.m. That's the time in paradise, relating back to the JFK assassination, that the door is sealed before the president is killed. James Marsden, Mars, Elon Musk, SpaceX. James Marsden plays JFK in The Butler. The first assassination attempt of Donald Trump is in Butler, PA, where he receives the wound to his ear, right? In Paradise, James Marsden's character then is struck a second time after the first time, and in between he draws a red X in blood, relating back to the metaphorical Great American Eclipse that is a blood moon. You see, it's a moon-child total lunar eclipse of the country. And that's why this symbolic ritual is on both sides of that event on March 14, 2025. Because it's symbolic of the larger ritual that is the moonchild eclipsing the United States of America. And obviously, as a part of the halftime ritual, you have the GNX, which stands for Grand National Experimental, on the stage with the ripped in half flag by the Gemini man. You see, this is the Gemini man who has ripped the flag in half, and they walk the flag down the stairs. It's being flown at half mast because the country is in distress. The flag is torn and tattered. It's like how they show it in the film about Donald Trump, Leave the World Behind, via the Metaphorical Friends series, which likewise had its finale released within 2 days of a similar total lunar eclipse blood moon. So they pressed play on that episode at the very end of the cyber attack that is depicting the destruction of the United States of America. The Gemini man has ripped the flag in half. It's being lowered down the stairs. The Grand National Experiment is over. It's in black, in shadows here. And this album, Grand National Experimental, GNX, was released on the day Kennedy was assassinated, right? Going back to this idea of Donald Trump potentially being assassinated. Wicked released on the same day. Going back to Oz, and The Wiz, the 9/11 ritual involving the sphere at ground zero, or at least what would become it. The 9/11. Okay, Donald Trump is the personification of this event, so now he has this association to Oz as well, because that is tied into the 9/11 ritual and the JFK assassination. Jack Ruby and Lee Harvey Oswald. And then you have Donald Trump taking that picture with his granddaughter, I believe, who's wearing the rainbow dress with the ruby slippers. And that photo is released 1 week after the Super Bowl ritual. Because again, this all involves the sphere, the pupil, the iris, the eye, and consciousness being pulled into a different dimension through this ritual. In the same way that the sphere is dropped through the device in contact, and Arroway's consciousness is sent somewhere else, where it encounters the man behind the curtain. And in particular, the reason that Donald Trump is so associated with Oz in this way is because he is allegedly revealing the man behind the curtain, right? In terms of the propaganda, there is a certain segment of those receiving it who believe that Donald Trump is actually, quote unquote, draining the swamp, right? They believe that Donald Trump is exposing the truth. They believe he's actually revealing the true man behind the curtain, the deep state, as it were. He's revealing the Wizard of Oz, in other words. But hopefully you can see how this is a part of a larger ritual where Donald Trump is the personification of 9/11, and how that event just changed consciousness in a fundamental way that it can never go back to. There's no place like home. Everybody wants to go back before that event and the path that it sent us on. But more broadly, Donald Trump, as the conspiracy theorist president, his role in being created to have that characterization leads to him continuing the 9/11 ritual and presenting people with this fake reveal of the man behind the curtain in order to trick them so that their consciousness can be a part of the controlled demolition, so that their energy can be harnessed to forever censor discussion of the truth, because this fake version of conspiracy theories that is represented by Donald Trump will be what they refer to in the history books as what, quote unquote, people who tell the truth claim to represent and say. And when they do that controlled demolition of Donald Trump in every way that they've already done it, and however they have it planned for the future, as that relates to him, conspiracy theories, and 9/11, it will forever be the taboo thing that you can't discuss in the same way that the Nazis are the taboo thing that cannot be discussed via what they attribute to Hitler and how they paint his character now in the history books. Donald Trump will serve the same purpose as it relates to the quote-unquote truth that's different from what the mainstream presents everyone. That concept is forever discredited through this process, and part of it is this fake revelation of the quote-unquote truth. They pretend to be giving you this truth. In all the ways that they do it, it's just Donald Trump is serving as the talisman for that whole thing. He is the resonator that attracts it. He's the moonchild that moves the water. And so everything that is loosely described as conspiracy theories is now assimilated into the Donald Trump umbrella, MAGA, QAnon, his whole movement. And through the way that they do this, the scripted way they do it, they will forever discredit it in the end game. That is why Trump is associated with Oz, in addition to all of this JFK stuff that might be relating to a potential future assassination, which would play into all of this, right? Potentially. Now, maybe it's just his character, like I've said before, and I'm saying now again, which it feels like a lot, but I have to make this clear. It could be just his character they're referring to symbolically that is assassinated through this process. It doesn't mean it's literal. It could mean it just precisely in the way I was just going into, where his character is built in this way so that it discredits everything and then speech can eventually be censored. As that relates to Project Stargate and all this digital ID, social credit score stuff that will come into being. It could be symbolic along those lines. His metaphorical assassination results in this outcome. But alternatively, it could be something along the lines of, yes, Donald Trump as a tower eventually falls because he's literally personifying 9/11, and in his tower falling, his head being shot, and then he falls in some event they portray to us on the television, like they portrayed the Butler, PA attempted assassination, except it seems very real to everybody. In the same way the JFK assassination was very real. Everybody saw his head explode live on television. I mean, that was the first 9/11, right? That was the first severely traumatic event that was designed to alter consciousness in a fundamental way that it could never recover from. And indeed, that's why Oswald was the assassin, because it was the start of this process. Really, that was the beginning of the decline of America, shifting it from post-World War II and this kind of idyllic society that had been created into something else. Starting that process, and then you can trace everything that happened with the 60s counterculture and how society was fundamentally altered from that decade on along these lines. That was sort of the beginning of the whole thing, but the Oz association is along those lines. Dorothy is subsumed by the tornado and transported somewhere else. In the same way that our consciousness experienced it through the screen on 9/11, just in a different way. Arguably in a more traumatic way, because the scope of it was so much broader than just one person shooting another person. And obviously, there was so much more programming that subconsciously was placed into the mind before that event, because it was designed to affect the world as a whole in terms of the actions that the United States of America would take in response that were then justified. Standard formula, but this was done on a scale that had never been done before, just because the level of the technology was not there yet. In 1963, in the same way that it was in 2001, where everybody pretty much around the world had a television set that they could go and watch this unfold on. In that way, it was a mass ritual for the whole world, and that had never been technologically feasible before. Sure, the events could be reported in a newspaper, but that would take months to circulate across the world. This was instantaneous. And indeed, COVID-19 was the escalation of 9/11, and they are related symbolically in terms of the programming. which is why the coronavirus term was coined in 1968, and 1968 has all of that 9/11 importance in terms of the events that transpired, the main one being the release of 2001: A Space Odyssey, and then breaking ground on one of the towers. At the same time, you make 9/11 the official emergency number, and then that same year, there's a plane crash on 9/11, right, in France, or it's a French flight. So you really tie that ritual together subconsciously in 1968. Coronavirus is a part of that, which later unfolds in this COVID-19 ritual, which is all a part of this, right? You can find headlines now as more truth is coming out about what really went down, where mainstream sources are talking about how the public has lost faith in these institutions that they used to have complete faith in. And that's all a part of weakening the structure of society. That was one of the main things that COVID achieved. And that was by design, because you have to weaken the existing structures so that something new can come into its place. And people have fundamentally lost faith in those who are supposed to be trusted in a very real way, especially the medical system, because of how they did not tell the truth during the pandemic. At least as it relates to the origins of the virus and where it came from, and how it was released. Anyways, I promised myself I wasn't going to do this when I started this video and just focus on the new stuff. But then as soon as you start talking about it, you get drawn into the whole thing. And I just can't help trying to big picture it and explain it in this context. Anyway, let's move on to this stuff that is specifically relating to Donald Trump and the JFK assassination, and how that might be symbolically related to something that potentially is coming in the future. GNX released November 22nd, the same day as Wicked, Oz, the Grand National Experiment Over, in the context of Kendrick Lamar at the Super Bowl halftime ritual, which was taking place in Caesar's Superdome, where you have Caesar on the roof here, and Donald Trump is in attendance. You have the Stargate, or Rainbow Bridge, the portal that they take you through at the beginning of the Super Bowl ritual, and then the end of it is game over, right? End of the American Empire, in the same way that Rome collapsed. And then Elon Musk is quoted as saying, America is the new Rome, right? It's going to collapse in the same way. The Gemini man, the twin of 9/11 that controlled demolition, is in Caesar's Superdome in relationship to game over. Now, this is most likely relating to America as the new Rome and its future, the decline of the empire that has been scripted into existence here, but it also could be relating to game over for Donald Trump as metaphorical Caesar. Along those lines, there was the movie Megalopolis, released, I believe, in September of 2024. Yeah, September 27th, 2024. And the plot of this film is very interesting in relationship to everything that I've been going into here, where 21st century New York City is restyled as a quote-unquote new Rome. And you have the main character named Caesar, which is played by Adam Driver. And the film draws on Roman history, particularly the Catalonian conspiracy of 63 BC and the decay of the Roman Republic into the Roman Empire. When you go to the Catalonian conspiracy, we can see that it was an attempted coup by Lucius Catalina to overthrow the Roman consuls of 63 BC. Marcus Cicero and Gaius Hybrida and forcibly assume control of the state in their stead. Hopefully you can see how that is very directly mirroring the plot that they have now given Donald Trump and Elon Musk. They are involved in a fascist coup, at least according to one part of the script, that is trying to overthrow quote-unquote democracy. In the same way that this Catalonian conspiracy attempted to do it in Rome, and it actually involved an attempted assassination of Cicero, which is very interesting because Adam Driver's character, Caesar, in this film is shot in the eye. Caesar takes a headshot in the same way that JFK took a headshot, in the same way that Donald Trump took one to his right ear, but survived. And Caesar also survives this attempt. But if we go with the foreshadowing in Paradise, there's potentially a final and second attempt coming. The naming here of the character is very intentional. Caesar Catalina. It's invoking the idea of the Catalonian conspiracy with Caesar as that relates to Donald Trump as the new Caesar of New Rome. Caesar is described as a man of the future so obsessed by the past. That's the movie. Back to the Future, right? Again, tying in the idea of the manipulation of time as it relates to this ritual. And that's throughout this whole movie where the character Caesar has the ability to stop time, at least as it's portrayed to us. And this is done through a substance that he has created that interacts with his subconscious mind in some way. Really, it's kind of like Venom as they present it in that Marvel series. In the film, the substance is their propaganda. The substance is their subconscious programming. And they're depicting it to you in a real way where it can stop and start time. He can create things out of it just with his mind. And in that way, it's building this new structure, this megalopolis that is existing outside of the old city. The old New York City, that's the new Rome, right? This substance is building something new. It's building the Golden Gate into this pristine, advanced technological society. And that's what their propaganda is doing. You see, it's the same thing, right? The idea of the Stargate, taking your mind from one place into another, altering consciousness, merging it with the internet so that it is something completely different. Dorothy leaves Kansas and is presented with this new, colorful world that is a different dimension from the one she comes from. And that is ultimately what it is saying here. And this is an area where Caesar stops time, and you have these beams that are giving this idea of 9/11 in New York City, these beams that built the Twin Towers, as that relates to Donald Trump as Caesar and his association with time travel, the creation of different parallel realities or dimensions, and how symbolically his role in the script is altering our perception of time. It's not about literal time travel, it's altering our perception of the time stream as our consciousness perceives it. And that's sort of what they're showing you in this film, through this character Caesar, who has the ability through this substance to stop and start time and manipulate matter. That is what the film itself is. You see, it's the same idea from 2001: A Space Odyssey. It's the screen that creates the Star Child, or in this case, the Moon Child. And the Stargate is depicted as a watery substance that the characters go through. In that way, the Moonchild is altering the water of the fabric of reality itself. You see? On the poster, they show you Kylo Ren holding the lightsaber, right? The Sith, with Morpheus down here in the film as well, relating to the idea that Neo is actually a Sith, in terms of how they use that programming in your mind to convince you that you are being awakened, when in reality, they planned your awakening all along the same way they planned it for Neo, to be unplugged at certain intervals by Morpheus. It's the same setup every time. And that's what's being achieved through this subconscious propaganda, which of course, not surprisingly, includes the Statue of Liberty in relationship to imagery that is evoking the idea of destruction. It's the last dance for America. The empire is in the process of being destroyed. It's just not overt in the way that you think of disaster in these films. It's more subtle in terms of what the character Donald Trump, the Caesar character, is actually doing. In the history books, it will be presented as an attempted coup. Also, the Caesar character is shown using the looking glass with a cube, which is getting at the same idea of the cube and the New Jerusalem, and just the cube as the black rock, the cube that is the crystallization of this programming in the mind, the calcification of it. Caesar is shot in the head in this film, and Caesar was in the Superdome for the symbolic Super Bowl ritual that directly tied into TikTok time and the inauguration into the second term, which is the second tower being struck by the second plane, in the context of the metaphorical controlled demolition personified by Donald Trump as the twin of 9/11, or the Gemini man. Kendrick Lamar releases his album on 11/22, the same day that JFK was assassinated. It's the sphere, or consciousness itself, going through the black hole pupil, transferred into a different dimension, transferred into the land of Oz. Deception made to be viewed as the truth. As Robert Ebert continues here, that's the movie, one that weaves Hamlet into a tale of an impossible substance that can shift reality. It's Julius Caesar told by someone who wanted to make his own metropolis. And, of course, Hamlet also involves an assassination by a poisoned sword. Doesn't seem to be an accident that one of the first lines by Caesar is evoking the Hamlet narrative, who of course is later shot in the face, particularly the eye, like the sphere, right? Shot through the eye. Metaphorically, that's what this propaganda is. You see? And in that way, your consciousness is transferred into a different dimension. It's shaped into something else. And because of the impossible substance that can shift reality, Caesar survives the first assassination attempt. Caesar survives the shot to the eye, which is telling you what the propaganda is in one way, where this is symbolic. We're shooting you through the eye. This is my film going through your eye. In the context of Caesar, as we present him to you via the script, that propaganda will reshape America into something else. It's eclipsing it. the Moonchild, which could be viewed as Hollywood as a whole, all this media as a whole, is altering the fabric of reality itself, pulling on it in this way, and your perception of the fabric of reality similarly. The impossible substance that is this subconscious imagination via the film and the effect it has on you is able to survive, quote unquote, death. Because the death is metaphorical for you, though in this case it might be more directly foreshadowing the death of Donald Trump in a style or manner similar to how it happened to JFK. It was interesting to me that the substance itself is referred to as megalon, which obviously has Elon in the word, which would get at the idea of Caesar using Elon and how Donald Trump is using Elon. They are intertwined in this attempted coup, quote unquote, right? They're intertwined in this ritual destruction of the United States of America to the point where outside of Trump's hotel in Las Vegas, the Cybertruck explodes, which is then placed outside of the White House through this March 14th total lunar eclipse blood moon ritual. The idea being, yes, this is Elon in the shadow of Trump's presidency. This is SpaceX rescuing the astronauts and sending their consciousness in the capsule down into the water in the same way that it happened in Contact, right? And in this way, it's a birth of something new. They were up there for 9 months. Caesar and Megalon. Caesar and Elon. And ultimately, that's what it is, right? Donald Trump and Elon Musk have no actual power. They don't actually have all of that money. That's just what they say on paper because it fits the narrative that they're going for. When you have the idea of capitalism being in its end stage, which we don't really have capitalism, we have monopoly capitalism that's presented as a free market. And sure, on some base level entry points, you can create something, at least in the United States of America, on your own. There is that freedom to start your own business, but there's a ceiling to it where you can only rise so far and then you're bought out and almost everybody agrees to the sale. In some way, you're either greedy and you want the money, or you're convinced you must sell it to us, right? So there's this ceiling that you reach, and then it's the monopoly capitalism where everything is controlled through these huge multinational corporations that keep a lid on everything, as it were. But when you're trying to sell a new system, you have to paint the idea of the acquisition of wealth as being pure evil. And so people like Donald Trump and Elon Musk are presented as some of the richest capitalists in history. And, oh, look at what they did. We can't let this happen again. We need something that's much more distributed. We need something that's much more communistic in origin so that something like this can never happen again. In other words, this is to say, they don't really have all that money. That's just what's attributed to them in the context of the script. They don't actually have any power. They are megalon. You see, they are this substance depicted in this film that can shape consciousness because it's created out of the imagination. It's propaganda that is coming from the mind of something else. And in that way, it's an egregore, right? That's another way to say it. It's the creation of the mind that becomes real by other people assimilating it and believing it to be true. When that fluid megalon substance becomes crystallized in the mind, then it's a belief system that is depicted and viewed as real. And people behave accordingly and shape their whole worldview around this completely fabricated, not real thing that just came from somebody's mind. That's what Caesar and Megalon are in this film as they're depicted, and that's what Trump and Elon Musk are. Just in general. Now, the finer details that could be pointing to Donald Trump's future, I don't know. Could be his character assassination, or could be a very literal assassination. We'll just have to see. Now, Aubrey Plaza was also in Megalopolis, where she plays this character, Wow Platinum, and is killed by a bow and arrow to the heart. Again, you have this idea of arrowway and consciousness and assassination. But the reason I'm bringing this up in particular is because I'm sure you'll all remember that Aubrey Plaza's husband died on January 3rd, 2025, just like 48 hours after the two rituals on New Year's Day, where the Cybertruck was blown up outside of Trump's hotel in Las Vegas, which is where Caesars started in America, I believe, the hotel and casino. And then you had the ritual before that in the early morning hours of January 1st in New Orleans, where the white lightning truck came over through Eagle Pass and ritually sacrificed a bunch of people in New Orleans right before the Super Bowl. Carrying an ISIS flag as that relates to the New Jerusalem and Dearborn, Michigan, where this truck is made by Ford, with Dearborn having the association of being the Muslim center of the United States of America. And then the deer in Leave the World Behind as that relates to the Teslas and Friends, Donald Trump, total lunar blood moon eclipse, which they show in that film as well with the tattered flag on the moon in the context of this blood moon eclipse. They press play on the Trump episode, which is the same as pressing play on this ritual, right? Where the lightning truck comes into New Orleans and strikes it, for lack of a better term, creates this perception in the mind of a sacrifice, spilled blood that is then subconsciously powering the larger Donald Trump ritual as Caesar in this context. As his role in America relates to the creation of Greater Israel and how that dispute between Israel and Palestine relates to the Muslim world and its role in this whole thing. Anyways, Aubrey Plaza's husband is found dead by suicide, allegedly, at the age of 47. So again, you have this coincidence of a death in relationship to 47 in the same way that it's depicted in Paradise. Aubrey Plaza in Megalopolis, and then this death happens right in the same window as these two rituals on New Year's Day, which is all related to America and Sirius more broadly in terms of the creation of the country in 1776 and turning it into something else. And Donald Trump's role in that as the moonchild who will eclipse the country. Well, right in that same context, you have her husband dying at age 47, right? The 47th president dying. We get this same imagery put into our minds. Now, to end here, I just want to talk a little bit about JFK Jr. and his alleged association to Donald Trump through QAnon. This is the other thread that associates Trump with Kennedy, or at least that family in general. As I'm sure most of you are aware, JFK Jr. died in a plane crash in 1999 on July 16th, the same day that Eyes Wide Shut was released. And these are allegedly JFK Jr.'s last words. His final words were spoken to air traffic controllers after he'd been directed to a runway. He said, 5-3 November to 2-2. Thanks. This represented a part of the tail number identifying his Piper plane. So it just so happens that the plane that crashes and his last words are November to 2-2. What's another way to say that? November 22nd. So his very last words recorded by anybody is November 22nd. He's directly referencing the assassination date of his father. This is on July 16th, 1999, the same day Eyes Wide Shut is released. I don't know what to make of that. Did that plane really crash? I have no idea. But it is said, artificially so, in this fake QAnon movement that JFK faked his death to later play a role in the Trump administration because they're all exposing the Clintons and the Democrat deep state, right? That whole fake fabricated narrative that is nowhere close to the truth of what's really going on. But it is out there. And then they use things like this. JFK gravesite aerial view. Coincidence, where it's making this shape that looks like a Q. This is JFK's burial plot in Arlington National Cemetery. You can see a different view of it here, where that's the Q that this is allegedly making. Which, regardless of whether or not QAnon is disinformation, which it is, this is a pretty interesting association that they've made in the context of the Kennedy assassination. Q, which is synonymous with Trump through 17, being the 17th letter of the alphabet, and all the 17 that is associated with Donald Trump. Forgetting about the QAnon disinformation, this could be pointing towards what I'm getting at here, right? This foreshadowing, this pre-scripted knowledge that Donald Trump, from his birth, was designed to serve a very specific role and purpose. And they knew from the beginning that this character would be assassinated, whether that's metaphorically or literally. And so the last president to be assassinated in this way, that kind of started the whole thing, in terms of the destruction of the United States of America, has a burial plot in the shape of a Q, the idea being, via all of these associations, that Donald Trump will be the last president, as it were. Donald Trump will embody Q as it relates to John F. Kennedy, and later be assassinated, quote unquote, in the same way. And of course, if that is what was going on, they would have it set up so the idea is entirely discredited, right? Oh, you're just one of those QAnon conspiracy theorists. You don't know anything. Because later, they actually had people believing this enough that they went to Dallas, where JFK Jr. was allegedly going to return, right? And be Trump's vice president, or something along those lines. At some point, the grand reveal is going to happen. He's going to come back into the public spotlight. I mean, this is the very definition of the man behind the curtain being revealed, right? The Wizard of Oz. The person who's really pulling the strings is revealed and the truth is known. So it's always kind of relying on that sort of theme. So it's no accident that it was included into all of these rituals. Why some QAnon believers think JFK Jr. is still alive and about to become vice president. Interestingly, though, going all the way back to the Trump Taj Mahal and George Foreman's last fight, there's this famous photo of First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy, who was obviously in the vehicle with JFK when he was shot, outside of the Taj Mahal in India. So again, you have this association between Kennedy and Donald Trump via the Taj Mahal and Jacqueline Kennedy here, which is where George Foreman, who just died in this same symbolic window, had his last fight at the Trump Taj Mahal on November 22nd, on the day that JFK was shot. And then just coincidentally, this is the same day that Wicked is released, the updated Wizard of Oz musical. Ruby shoots Oswald, who had shot Kennedy, and this is also the same day that they have Kendrick Lamar release GNX, The Gemini Man, the twin of 9/11, those two towers are destroyed in a controlled demolition, and perhaps via all this association to Kennedy and JFK's assassination, Donald Trump is a tower that will fall himself. Now, that is happening metaphorically through his two terms, right? Those are him personifying those two towers. They are falling through all the actions in his two terms, and that includes the metaphorical 17 minutes between the plane strikes until the final collapse of the last tower standing at 10:28, which is the same day Stargate is released, the same day Matthew Perry is killed. Metaphorically, yes, he is collapsing via his two presidential terms and all of the symbolic actions he is taking along these lines, but maybe he's also a tower that will fall himself and quite literally personify 9/11 in the same way that it happened to JFK. I don't know. Again, I'm going to say this as many times as possible to reiterate that I do not know, and I'm not predicting anything here. I'm just saying possibilities in relationship to what all of this symbolism is pointing towards.